Hello. So, welcome back, Ed. Rene will be joining us a half hour late. Jeff Sutton is on travel, so we're the usual group, and thank you all again. I want to just, we have a lot of new folks who are in the room. Some have been attending our meetings, others not. And so I want to clarify what it is we are doing for those who haven't heard this. And it won't take long because we have plenty to do. This is the Geothermal Public Health Assessment Study Group. This was set in motion by Mayor Kanoy. My name is Peter Adler. I agreed to do this provided there would be zero political interference from anybody, and there hasn't been. I'm happy to report that. This is not under the control of PGV. It is not under the control of the county. It's an independent group. We've got a group assembled that has community people, longtime historical people, Bob and many others, who are very knowledgeable about these issues. We have technical people, we have scientists, we have a toxicologist. Jeff, who can't be with us today, is an expert on a lot of volcanic gases. So we have plenty of experience around this group, and we've been working at this very hard. These meetings are part of what's going on, but there's also lots of email communication, exchanges of documents, the building of a resource materials collection and bibliography. And our goal, at the end of the day, is not a policy goal. Our goal is to produce a list of the issues, health-related issues that we're most worried about and causing concerns for us, and to recommend studies. And to do that, we have been trying to wade through lots and lots of issues, to understand the long history of complaints, to understand the issues of what are hazardous materials in there, but most of all, to understand exposures, which is really critical. We've been struggling with all these things, and you'll hear a bit more of that today. So we are now in the sort of last quarter. If this was, I don't know, whatever sport you choose, we're in the sort of end game. We're not in the end zone yet. But we are moving into the end stage, and our job ultimately is to produce a report that will have a listing of the issues, some findings, our best synthesis of what we can. It won't be a full historical record of everything that's been done, but our best sense of the science and the data sets that we've seen and the comments we've heard, and to prepare those recommendations and move those forward, hopefully by the end of May. So we will be drafting a report. My fondest hope is that it will be with the highest possible levels of consensus, even if we come from different angles on this, that we could say, this is what we think, this is what Mayor, this is what we need to study. We have been making time available at the end of every meeting for observers to make comments. We welcome those comments, but not during the meeting. This is a study group, it's not a public meeting. So I just need to be clear about that, so that you don't all of a sudden raise your hand and say, I got something to say about what Ed Fisher just said, or what Laura said, or what you said. So there will be time at the end, and I'm committed to staying as late as needed to hear every comment that might come forward. By the end, up until the point where I have to get on an airplane. So I thank you all for coming, and I know we are also going to spend a little time trying to understand the best knowledge we can get from the March 13th incident. I know many of you would be interested in that. I know all of us in the study group will be interested in that. Just a few more things. These meetings are challenging because everybody has an opinion, everybody wants to say something. We have lots of histories in the room, and so I ask for your help today with courtesy and civility, the greatest you can muster. Even if you have strong passions and have lots of testimonies to give, it's really important. Otherwise, we will not be able to do this work. Before, I will say just a few more things, and that is before we finalize our report, we're going to create a draft report, and we will welcome the community's comments to that report. So there's going to be an opportunity for everybody to say, hey, I don't like this, I don't like that, I didn't think this was correct, the science doesn't say this. So there will be that opportunity. We're a meeting, at least a meeting, maybe 2 meetings away from it. But that will happen, that's a commitment. So your civility today is really crucial. When we start speaking, I'm going to ask you all to be very brief, and we can talk about that later in the day. I will try to honor comments and brief comments from those who stayed for the whole meeting as opposed to those who popped in at 5 minutes to 5 to make their comment. So, I hope I get it right. I will do my very best. I'd like to just quickly run through and let everybody introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with Kayla, if you would.
I'm Kayla Carter. I'm from Pahoa, Hawaii. I'm back, same as my folks, and I'm assisting Peter on the project.
I'm Liberty Gashwar. My background is civil and environmental engineering, and my specialty is toxic gas monitoring equipment.
Robert Petricci, president of Puna Geothermal, operate a salvage logging business, and I'm an organic farmer.
Ed Fisher, I'm the Associate Dean with the College of Pharmacy, toxicologist, and a pharmacist.
Hi, Laura Travis. I'm a registered nurse and resident here in Puna.
Al Detweiler, member of Leilani Community Association, former president of Leilani Board, and close relative to the Geothermal Venture.
Jay Bonds from Leilani Estates, homeowner and resident. Historically, my background is employee chemical safety.
It'll sound better.
Safety for
She's not going to hurt anybody.
I'm Tom Travis, retired from the Navy and retired from civil service, retired live in Puna.
Jim Haker, retired from professorship in ecology at Utah State University. I don't know about law.
Hi, Dr. Lampton. Later on recording the meeting.
You might think this is sounds like a retirement home, but we're not. We actually are working very hard, and everybody around this table has put huge amounts of time into this, and more lies ahead. So again, I say thank you for stepping up to a very tough task. All the materials, the meeting notices, the agendas, the meeting summaries, the briefing papers are all online. They're all online and available. So
Or if you don't have a computer.
Go to the library. So I can't help you with that problem. So, but everything is as transparent as we can possibly make it. But again, I remind you, we're not in a public meeting. We're in a study group, in a deliberation. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go right around with the study group and ask you if you have a couple of minutes and you might summarize whatever insights you have from the March 13th incident. And we have lots of questions, lots of issues, and lots of concerns. But if you have, based on what you know, if you have any insights, let's get them on the table. And then I'm going to invite Darryl Oliveira to come up from Civil Defense, right, Darryl? And Jeff, if you would have things to add, but it's really Darryl's chance to kind of tell us a little bit about what you're learning out of that incident. So I want to open the floor. I'm not going to do this round robin, but if you have a couple of comments about what you know, you've been all watching this pretty carefully. Bob, you should start because you've been really focused on that and giving us lots of information.
All right, well, about 4 o'clock on the 13th, I got a phone call from Diane Thomas, who lives, overlooks the power plant. She said there was a loud explosion type of noise and a really loud noise, and there was some kind of steam plume coming from the plant. So I drove up there, and I could see the steam plume on the way up. And when I got up to the corner of Hainalu and Pohoiki Road, I drove over to Aurora's old house, and up by the monitoring station, I could see the plume, but I didn't smell any H2S there. So I went back and I went around to the old HGPA site. On the way there, I could start smelling the hydrogen sulfide, and my nose started burning. So I got Mike. I had been trying to call Mike. I got Mike on the phone while I was there. I was talking to Mike. Ron Cusada, the environmental officer, pulled up, and he had a Jerome portable monitor. So he got out and was getting ready to take a reading. So I went over and I stood next to him, and he took a reading, and the reading was 0. And I was really angry. At that point, I got angry because I could smell the hydrogen sulfide. I had Mike on the phone. My nose is burning, and I couldn't understand how that monitor was reading 0. So at that point, I went back. I left, and because I didn't see what else I could get done there. And I talked to civil defense 3 times, trying to file a report. I wanted to report it, so basically civil defense told me they were told by PGV that the readings were 0, there were no emissions. I told civil defense that was not possible because we were smelling hydrogen sulfide in the community. And so he said he'd get back to me. And Mike and them finally got back to me too. Trying to remember exactly what happened. But as the conversation goes on, maybe I can add some more to it. That's probably a pretty good start.
We'll have some further discussion.
So, I didn't see any emergency responders. I was the first person on the scene. I wasn't notified by PGV. I wasn't notified by the county. I wasn't notified by the community. And just in case people aren't aware, there was also another accident since then on March 2nd. There was another accident at PGV.
April 2nd.
I'm sorry, I keep saying that. It's April 2nd. And again, notification came from somebody driving down the road that drove through a cloud of H2S. Same thing, PGV says the monitor's all red 0. So I'd like to talk about that accident too at some point.
Good, thank you. Renee, introduce yourself. We went through introductions.
Oh, Rene Siracusa.
Can
I'm
you
sorry
say
I'm late.
just one more
It's a
minute about-
Holocaust Remembrance Day. I'm a little turned up here. I had, when I got these 27 pages from Mike about all the incident reports, right? And I noticed that on them he, besides saying what actions they took, it also says who they contacted. And they always contact.
Based on the March 13th incident you're speaking of?
Well,
that's what we're talking about.
All of it, I just want to say that there's nobody home at DOA.
Okay.
So when Bob talks about no emergency responders, and one of the entities that's supposed to be responding is Department of Health, there's nobody there. They've never filled that position. And if Leslie Noe is here, I'd like to know how long
Renee,
that's
look,
been.
we know you came in a few minutes late, so let me just tell you what we're doing here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, let me just tell you.
I do
what we're doing is
understand.
taking just a couple minutes to hear from everybody about March 13th.
Okay.
And then I promise you we'll come back because those are findings, recommendations.
You
that
did
we're
raise a
gonna make.
good point, and I did try to call Department of Health, and I tried every number I could find, and I got a recording. I could not get Department of Health. And also it also raises the point is that people don't know who to call. There's there's no list of when these kind of accidents happen, we don't know who to call. We don't know how to file a report. I had to ask Civil Defense to take my report 3 times. I talked to them, I was explaining what was happening, and they never asked me for my name. They never asked me where I lived or anything. And I had to say, I want to make a report, and I had to say it more than one time until she finally said, okay, let me get a form and take a complaint form. So I think that relates to this group is like when we look through the records and we say there's no community reports of these accidents and impacts, it's very difficult to file a report.
I have some additional information that we just picked up from Newton and from Department of Health, that background incident reports. Jeff sent something around. I'm not evaluating whether those are good or bad. So we are going to, there's materials that I have to get out to you. I just got it yesterday, as a matter of fact. So it's going to get scanned and we'll send to you. So we'll have, again, we've been acquiring our information and it's not all neat and tidy. How about others who might want to make a comment on March 13th? No, I'm not taking comments from you, sorry. I'm going to have to ask you to wait until the end of our meeting. Thank you. I know that's hard.
In Hilo at the time, I was on the road, so I don't have firsthand, but I'm on the board of directors for Leilani, and the CERT director was notified by the plant that there has been an incident at the plant, and part of their basic operating is to notify local CERT in Leilani. His next step is to notify me as a board, and at the time we were told there's been an incident, and it was just a heads up. There was not much other information available. And so as far as I was concerned, that happened properly. By the time I got home, an hour and a half later, I did try and get an update. I went to the plant's website. It was my first choice, and didn't find that in there, and actually I communicated with Mike after that, hey, nobody really knows where to go to get up to date reports, and it would have been good if somebody could have put those blurb on the website. But other than that, Wi-Fi protocols were followed.
What
Laura,
time?
wait, hang on. We're gonna hear
I
from
just wanna know what time he was.
Yeah, I do too. What
because-
time did Sir
Yeah,
get
I
those?
can't tell you that,
I don't know
like I
who
could
Mike
say
was.
I was on the road, but Mike wouldn't necessarily know, I don't know that Mike called me certain.
I made a call.
Okay.
Hang on, Mike. I wanna let the study group just get the questions and issues out, because they're a microcosm of many of the things we've been talking about all along. Laura, did you have something else, or
I
was it?
just, from what I was reading about notifications, it was quite a while.
Okay.
I just thought.
Yeah, I don't recall, I was driving at the time and trying to not look like I was talking on my phone. And, it was daylight certainly, but I don't know, and I was actually at least the second or third in line after the initial call was made, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, normally the process had been that I usually got a notification from PGV when they made this instance occur. I didn't get no phone call from PGV, and got no call from anybody, any source, that there was something happening, and I find that bizarre, considering how close I am to that plant, that one of these people would have took the effort to find out whether I know anything about this or not, so, to say the least, I'm upset.
Others, anybody else wanna comment on the study group? Tom?
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 issues, I think, that have to be examined as a result of what happened. One is that the exposures appear to be far more varied than what I had originally believed. The fire department, as I understand it, it might have been a hazardous material group, but I think it was the fire department, took readings of 1 ppm and 3 ppm, or 1,000 ppb and 3,000 ppb. And which were far in excess of what the portable monitoring equipment of PGD was reading, and far in excess of what we're led to believe that monitoring in PGD was. So that opens up a whole new idea about what possible exposures are. Whether those, when Civil Defense Director talked about it, he spoke that his experience with taking SO2 samples had been the same, and that he had had widely varied exposures over time. That really struck me that there are some other issues. Additionally, the fact that there was not alarms at the plant, but that the plume going straight up actually shot over the plant and shot over the monitors and then landed at those kinds of levels in the community certainly places great doubt on the monitoring, and it certainly makes me reconsider what the possible exposures have been in accidents in the past. As a consequence of that, the assumptions about the size and composition of the exposure group and control groups has to be questioned. If we're having that much higher exposure, then it seems to me far more possible that the exposure group might be much higher or much larger around PTB than what we believed that it was. That's all I have for right now.
So just, I want to just, put a few things there. I've also been online with many of you trying to understand what are we learning out of this, and in a minute we'll hear from Darryl. But again, it's a good reminder, because we've just heard on 2 or 3, maybe 4 of the big issues which we've been struggling with, and which we will come out with some findings and recommendations on as best we can. And so one of those is this exposure picture has, from the beginning of our discussion, been very problematic. We haven't gotten good information, and we know that exposure is really crucial. And I don't say this saying bad things about anybody else. I just say we're struggling with this to understand the exposure pictures historically and contemporaneously. Second thing we've heard and talked about, which will be the source of some recommendations for us, is this whole business of community notification. How do people learn? How do they know? How do they get access to both immediate acute information, but also longer term information, which, so that's gonna be an issue for us. Very fair to raise the question of what's the DOH role in public health surveillance. I suspect we'll say some things about that in our findings and your recommendations. So, I just wanna see before I get Darryl up here, and we're not gonna waterboard Darryl, I'm just telling you, so, this is gonna be a courteous and civil meeting, and, so he's not gonna do that kind of stuff where we, you know, you guys, I have a little bit of water here, but the civility is really good with this many people in the room. And we can be very tough on the issues and pretty, courteous with each other. Any other things from the group on the March 13th before we ask Darryl to speak to us?
I got a couple. One,
Go for it.
I think the exposure data that we've been seeing, if we rely on PGV's readings of 19 and 27 and the ERT readings in the community of 3,000 seem to be low. So, you know, we're talking about exposure levels. What has the community been exposed to? Looking at the historical data from PGV, it's very, very low. I mean, it's 100 times different. So, I think, like, if anything, the exposure levels are much greater, you know, not less. And the other part would be about if there's a 3,000 parts per million reading in the community, I think that's a permit violation. And I don't think that Department of Health has done anything about that. The 25 part per billion average is the limit. Now that's at the plant boundary. At the plant boundary, they had a 25, maybe 27 part per million. But in the community, we had a reading of 3,000. I read the Department of Health rules, and it's not limited to the plant boundary. Those rules apply beyond the plant boundary. So I don't understand why the Department of Health hasn't stepped in, why we haven't heard anything from the Department of Health, and why PGV hasn't been cited for violating the permit.
Yes.
Yes, I want to say that the geothermal resource permit, the GRP, is under the, kuleana of the planning department. And I noticed that, the planning department, well, maybe it's not the planning department that was, it says HPD right there, Hawaii County. HCPD could mean Hawaii County Planning Department or Hawaii Police Department. Mike, would you clarify that? The notifications?
Go ahead, Mike, quickly, what is that?
Because if it's the planning department,
Okay, fine.
it is the planning department, okay. Because if the planning department, they haven't sent anyone out to investigate, as far as I know, of these 27 pages of incident reports. And the permit is under their, responsibility, and so that's another agency that is dropping the ball in terms of monitoring and follow-up.
And I just think as we go into the end of the arc of our work here, we're gonna have things to say about this in our report. You've already seen a very first preliminary draft. If we have time today, which is my hope, we will start to work on some of the concepts.
We need to fluff it up.
Absolutely, but I wanna make sure that we have time to do that, and that's why I don't wanna get trapped in you know, just March 13th, because there's a history, and we're trying to grapple with all that. I'm ready to bring Darryl up and hear from Darryl a little bit about what you're learning, or what you have learned, or what you're doing on this, and again, for the first, I want to see if there's anything else. And we're being, tell us who we're being videoed by and where it's gonna be.
I'm Carrie
Hi, Carrie. And where is this gonna be shown?
on the YouTube.
On who's?
On YouTube.
On YouTube? And you'll be able to film the whole thing, correct?
I hope so.
Because a part of our ground rules are no problem filming, but we don't wanna have things taken out of
I'm
context.
media, and you cannot tell me what to post and what not to post, but I absolutely make an effort to cover everything gavel to gavel. But you don't need to say that. That's not your right to say that. I can post whatever I like.
You're absolutely right, and then I'll ask you to, if you don't mind stepping back, please, from the table. You can leave your mic up there, whatever you want, just step back. Thank you. Come on up here. Anywhere. Hey, you can leave the mic.
Well, I can't, it's less disruptive if I don't run up and move it all the time. Yeah?
Darryl, where are you? You wanna sit?
Wherever you want me to be.
Why don't you sit where Carrie was?
I'd rather have you over here, but, well, wherever you want. I think you should be. This is live stream.
That's fine, we need a place for Darryl, come and seat in the corner. You want me to stand? Whatever you like, whatever you're comfortable with. There's a discussion, so. And I know everybody wants to hear what I have to say, so I'll stand and maybe you can hear me in the back. But I guess I'll just run through a couple of things regarding the chronology and how things went on that particular day. Just to give you some background on myself, I just became the Civil Defense Director on January 9th. I've been in that position for a few months now. Prior to that, I was retired for about a year and a few months. Prior to that, I was with the fire department. So I'm familiar with the fire department's policy, procedures, etc. And slowly getting myself back into the group of civil defense policies, procedures, etc. So I do hold myself responsible, just as you should hold me responsible for that position, including the responsibilities. I'm not making an excuse. I've been here a few months, and I'm responsible for what that office does. So as far as the incident in particular, on that day, right around 4:06 or so, I got a call from dispatch notifying me, I was on the road as well, that they had received a call from Mike at PGB that they had an incident that was ongoing. So he immediately asked what was the nature of the incident. They said they did have a release, a pretty significant amount of steam coming out of the system, as well as loud sound. People from the community were also calling dispatch at the time and reporting that what they heard, what they saw, and what they were smelling, and some individuals were actually indicating that they were selfies actually. So with that information, I asked our dispatch, the fire department dispatch, to go ahead and dispatch the Pahoa engine company, the first responding unit, as well as the hazmat unit out of Hilo. The hazmat station is based at Pahoa Fire Station in Hilo. So we immediately got the resources responding. And at the same time, we also notified the Parks and Rec department to stand up the community center as a collection point, if you want to call it an evacuation site, for those residents that were leaving the area. Right away, we also started working on information to get out to the public as far as what was happening, what you could do, where you might go. Some of that we needed to clarify with PGB, so we were going back and forth communication-wise, trying to confirm what was the nature of the event. So when we do a broadcast by radio as well as with the mass notification system that we currently have, so an email and text message, we're going to give the community the right information as accurate as we could. So that message, I think, was the radio message somewhere around 4:40 was broadcast, as well as the text messages and the emails went out shortly thereafter. They were being launched simultaneously. There are obviously some delays with how quickly they got. I know at the meeting on that Saturday, the Puna meeting, there was there was some comment as far as the time delay with getting the messages out. So if you want to have some lessons learned for us, how can we do from a civil defense standpoint, how can we get information out quicker to the community? Right now, our system is limited to the radio message, the mass notification message. We don't have access to, let's say, a community point of contact, which might be the source of a telephone tree. And we're looking into a siren type of a notification. I've been in recent conversations as recent as this past week with state civil defense. One of the things that's ongoing across the state is an upgrade and renovation of the existing siren system, primarily for the tsunami warning system. But you do have a siren right there in the Leilani state subdivision. That siren is targeted for an upgrade or retrofit. The project, as it was developed, had prioritized the sirens for upgrade and retrofit based on 3 levels of priority. Originally, the Leilani Estate subdivision siren was at a priority 3, so it wouldn't have been something that was going to be addressed right away. The reason for that is they were prioritizing those sirens in the tsunami inundation area that needed to be fixed or replaced, as well as new installations within the inundation area. So my conversation, as well as a formal letter to the state civil defense vice director, was to request that the Leilani Estate subdivision siren be pushed up to priority 1, and I have gotten that approval from them, with the desire that we would give it its own tone or its own sound specific for a PGB incident or hazmat release. So that project is underway. Timeline, I couldn't tell you how quickly that's going to happen. I've asked them to make it as quickly as possible. As you saw in the media recently, as it relates to the siren events, I am waiting for a more tentative and firm schedule from State Civil Defense and the Department of Accounting and General Service on a schedule for all the sirens. And then I can probably tell you what's happening with Leilani. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know, you tell me. is it possible to activate just one siren, or if when you go on and when you push the button, does it do it island-wide?
And that's part of the good question. The question is, if we activate the sirens currently, can we isolate to one siren, or do we turn them all on? The current system, which is decades old, and that's why it's being upgraded and renovated and retrofitted, yes, all sirens go on at once. We don't have the luxury of picking just one siren. However, with that new upgrade, we will have that capability where we can isolate and turn on just one siren.
And how soon will that be?
As I mentioned, I don't have a timeline for you. I'm trying to get that from them. They want to complete the entire project in the next 18 months. So that means statewide, all the sirens. So somewhere in that 18-month period is when we'd have the siren at Leilani corrected.
Can I ask a question?
On the
Yeah, on
sirens,
that, what level would trigger a response like, and also part of that relates to PGV's consistently been reporting low or zero H2S, so how are you gonna decide when to trigger that?
I think for us, we have a lot of work to do at Civil Defense along with the Fire Department and Department of Health. You know, as Peter mentioned, and I think Tom mentioned, I have some, let's say, experience to share with what we were dealing with the SO2 with the eruption. And that is, we saw readings that would fluctuate dramatically. We saw levels that would vary as far as duration in different parts of the island. And some of you may have maybe, or may recall the media releases we did then, but we were seeing readings of up to 20 parts per million in Ocean View with sulfur dioxide. That's, you know, miles away from the site. And I recently met with Mr. Chris Bilbao in the back. He was at the meeting as well as a meteorologist. And we've been talking about how can we improve our capability to qualify and quantify the exposure, the risk, the threat, by taking into account the atmospheric, geographical, and actual emission release characteristics and try to come up with a better model. It's going to be tough, and that's why I said we need to work on it more. So as far as levels, we would like to probably sit down with PGB and more importantly with Department of Health and EPA, because right now we're following the EPA guidelines as far as the alert, the watch, and the warning. But because those levels can change so quickly, depending upon environmental factors, we may have to tweak that a little and come up with much more conservative levels so that it gives you a better scenario where you protect yourself.
Do you have any hindsight or insights onto the variable exposure reading? So we heard 0 to 3,000 ppb or 3 ppm. What do you make of that?
Again,
what are we to make of that?
Yeah, the two readings that the fire department recorded, and I believe they were on Pohoiki Road. I know I mentioned it at the Saturday meeting. They were very isolated readings and very short-lived. When we talked to the technicians from HAZMAT, they said, you know, the readings probably were registered or recorded for less than a minute. And that's a similar type of experience we had with the sulfur dioxide with the volcanic eruption. And as far as explaining to you why I'm not a chemist, nor I'm not a meteorologist, but I can share with you that because that particular product is very similar to the H2S, and it has the characteristics or properties such as it's slightly heavier than air. What we saw with the sulfur dioxide, you could get a pretty significant reading in low spots, which is where the HAZMAT said one of the readings was, as well as depending upon the weather conditions, it would vary dramatic.
And your readings from the fire department were on drones?
No, they're using, we call it a Q rate. It's another product that measures in parts per million and in increments of 0.1 parts per million.
Okay. Other questions or other comments?
I got one more question. Yeah. So if it drops below 1 part per million, they're not going to read it?
Correct. If it's below 0.1 parts per million.
So it could be 900 parts per billion and you'd get a 0.
0.1. We can go as minute as 0.1
What is
parts per
0.1?
million.
0.1.
So that's 100
parts per billion.
That would be the low.
That'd be the
That's the low range.
Yes.
So that was the type of a piece of equipment that they're using.
Correct.
But not all pieces of equipment are created equal. Some will measure lower than that.
Correct.
But of course, it's good for money because the better units, more money. So it's capable of, you're capable of the fire department or civil defense, capable of measuring lower if they have the right equipment.
Yes, and that was one of the things that, again, I saw value in coming to this meeting. knowing what you bring to the table as far as some guidance on the technology, because all of us, PGB, Civil Defense, the Fire Department, Department of Health, Police Department, we held an after-action review that Friday immediately following the incident. The purpose of those after-action reviews is for all of us, the responding agencies, to discuss what lessons we learned, what we can do better, what we can improve on. And one of the, I guess, consensus comments was we gotta improve our public notification, which we're working on that. And the other one is improve our monitoring capability in the community. I also met with Mayor Kinoy and got his support and endorsement for me to pursue additional fixed monitors in the community, not owned by PGB, not owned by the fire department, but maybe it can be either Department of Health or another entity, but they would be situated within the community to give you a better, kind of a broader picture of what's happening when there is a release. So we're moving on that, and that's all to be.
We will have recommendations on this. We will be coming out with some for whatever, we'll do our own deliberation and pass it on to you and the mayor, so, Tom.
I have actually three issues. One is that I don't think the siren is necessarily sufficient, and it's not currently in place. And I wondered if you were developing plans to compensate for the fact until it is in place or until we have a sufficient system.
Right now, I mean, the best I can do is those sources of information going out, as well as asking for help from the community. There's a way that there are key points of contact that we can notify immediately, whether it's Bob or others in the community. We gladly, from civil defense standpoint, make that contact right away and start the information flowing out to the community. Other than that, we're limited to the radio, the mass notification, and a door-to-door by the first responders.
One of the challenges for us as a study group will be to formulate the best recommendations we can on this very point. So here's how to talk about bulking it up. Wait,
The siren for the ambulance, for example, we use?
Tom didn't finish. Renee, hold on.
My second question has to do about there was a trifold handed out at a Leilani Community Association meeting prior to your time, and that trifold establishes a 1 ppm limit as a threshold in which civil defense would evacuate certain subpopulations by notifying them door to door. That did not take place. Could you explain why that decision was made not to do that, even though you received the 1 ppm?
And the 1 ppm reading, as I mentioned, was very short-lived, so it wasn't a sustained reading in the community. And that's things that we're looking at. How do we improve or we modify our current notification and evacuation protocols?
I'll just make a comment on that. If it was short-lived, it may have been because the noxious gas was moving, not because there wasn't a threat. So if you do very monitoring that isn't dense and you get a high reading, you have to assume you're not reading the highest reading. It would be very unlikely if you took 5 readings that the readings you took are the highest. And therefore, it would seem like to me that the argument that it was short-lived would not necessarily be a justification. That's my opinion, and you have to make the call. The last one is a question for you, but it's a little off, and if you want me to delay it, I will. But
why don't you put it out and then we may hold it.
Jeff sent us a letter or a memorandum describing the number of incidents that civil defense has responded to over the last, since 2004. And in that letter, remarkably few incidents. In that letter, he indicated that civil defense has not kept accurate records about incidents. That led me to question the fact that I believe that your organization was responsible for training the multi-agency response. And as you said, after this incident, you did an after-action report. It would seem like to me that there are some lessons that happen over a period of years. You know, you have 5 incidents and 5 times in a row you have the same problem. You need to address it. Seems like to me that you ought, that the civil defense would need to have those kinds of records to adequately develop lessons learned and improve their response. But evidently, those records aren't available. Or do you have any intention of improving that record and training capability?
Correct. One of the things, as long as I'm the director there, is we're gonna provide for better archiving of information and the incidents that we experienced or were involved in. But as you mentioned, and I shared with Jeff, there were no records of any incidents or the prior incidents on file.
Yeah.
Maybe between you and Darryl, can you just give me a sense of what are the subpopulations that are required to be notified?
They're old and very young, I think. It's in the trifold.
As well as those who may be vulnerable to existing
Yeah.
respiratory.
They have to
problems.
register for that in some way, shape, or form. How do
Well,
you know?
And that's another thing that we'll have to, again, work with the community on is, one is making sure people feel comfortable sharing that kind of information with us, because we've seen in other communities across the country, if you were to identify vulnerable population and put, let's say, a placard on their home, in some cases, it's been an invitation for people to get robbed, because they see someone as being vulnerable. So we want to be sensitive to that too, but we want to know who in the community needs our help. When we were dealing with sulfur dioxide, one of the things we did in the different communities was target or identify where those at-risk populations were, care homes, hospitals, schools, etc. So again, we can work very closely with the community to improve our awareness of who is where. Going back to, I think Tom's comment about the 1 part per million and the decision to evacuate, yes, it's probably possible and likely that we had readings higher and varying all over. But I know a question that came to me after the Saturday meeting was, are you going to tell us to drive through the product? And that's one of the things we have to do a better, I want to say, analysis of is how do we forecast where that product is going? So if we tell you to drive up Pohoiki Road, we're not telling you to drive through a cloud of hydrogen sulfur. So we're looking at, again, working closely with Mr. Bilkoff. I reached out to other people in the meteorological arena to see how we can do better plume modeling, even if it's just a model for us to use as a guide with giving some better information and directional picture.
Rene, then Bob.
Yes, this takes us right back to the whole issue of emergency response plan for the community. Because at this point, the community associations, the neighborhood watch groups, or the search groups, don't know if something happens, they don't know how to direct their people. So in areas where you could evacuate going this way or that way, if everyone chooses this way, it's gonna jam up and no one's gonna be able to get out. And I think it sort of seems to me that it would be most effective to get the community, easier on civil defense also, if everybody knew what to do. It's like when I was a kid in school, we had fire drills, right? So we all knew where the exits were, where the staircases were. If civil defense would develop something like this, or if they haven't already developed, to share it with the communities, especially with the groups within the communities that would take local, responsibility, that would be a big help. The other point I started to make before was that until such time, 18 months or whatever, that you can get a #1 rated siren in Leilani, if people have to be notified, and a lot of people may not have radios, or may not have a radio turned on, or may not have computers or whatever, you have fire engines and you have ambulances that have sirens. Even the police cars, I believe, have sirens. Which one has the loudest siren that would, if you station one at the plant, or I say on 2 or 3 sides of the plant, that would just keep their siren going to notify the public that something is wrong? What is their effective radius?
It's not very far. The tsunami sirens are a quarter mile, so the vehicle sirens will be much less. But it is still another tool we can use. As I mentioned, one of the ways we've notified the community is to go door to door using PA as well as the sirens. So it's ideas like that. We could easily situate a vehicle at the plant. The challenge maybe is if you're having a loud release, people may not hear it.
Well, maybe vehicles on different sides of the plant to cover a wider radius. But it also, I experienced the door-to-door thing one time when they were brush fires. And, a lot of people couldn't get notified because they have a gate right on the road, and then 500 yards or more before you get to the house, and the pit bulls are snarling at the gate. There's no way they could get notified, so we really have to look for, better,
We're gonna have to do some things.
better
We're trying to figure
procedures
out what, yeah,
for
what
notification,
lies in this.
yeah.
Bob was next, then Tom.
I got a couple of things. One is, can we have a copy of the county emergency response plan?
Sure.
I'd like to have a copy of that for, and, the other thing was, I'd like to have a copy so I can take it home, cause I wanna work on it and see what I can come up with.
And Bob, those are things that I would hope we could land in our recommendations too, where we say, we got
I'd
five
like to
ideas.
get one as soon as I can, cause I wanna start working
You know
on
what I
it.
mean?
Okay, and another thing was, they had another accident on April 2nd. When did you find out about it?
I was called at about 9 PM. I believe the release was about 7.
All right, so, can you tell us about that?
I was called by dispatch and was informed, PGV reported they had a 15-minute episode, no detectable limits. That's the extent. When I followed up with, Ron the following day, again, it was a very short-lived event with no detectable, monitored.
Okay, well, just for your information, the reason that I knew about it, I called at 7 whenever. I got a call at 7:25. There was H2S in the community, stretched 3/4 of a mile past the perimeter of the power plant. So again, I have to say, for PGV to say that there were no detectable limits of hydrogen sulfide, I cannot explain that, but they cannot explain how I knew they had that accident if I couldn't smell that gas in the community. And I smelled it as far away as Yoga Oasis, which is quite a distance from that power plant. So I have a problem, that we have a problem. I mean, PGV is insisting, when I talked to Mike about this incident, he can relate to this maybe later, on the phone when I first talked to him, he wasn't aware of it. That was at 8:15, I called him and talked to him. He wasn't even aware that it happened. And he called me back at 8:34 and told me that they had to put protective gear on to go in to work on that problem. So if they didn't have any H2S, why did they have to put on protective gear and go work on that?
Do you think that the complexity of this, accident, warrants a periodic, drill with the community?
Yes, and that's one of the things, in addition to the improved monitoring capability that I just discussed with American and supports again. So we see things we can do to ensure that the community understands the response plan. First, making sure you have it, exercising that response plan, and periodically reviewing it with the community to make sure it's current and applicable for what we're seeing change. As well as a lot of times we'll see new people move into the community. It's a means of making sure they're familiar with the process.
Thank you.
Al, next, then we.
Don't you already have a reverse 911 system in your civil defense?
The reverse 911 system that City Watch is no longer being used. What we have is Alerting Solutions, which is a mass notification, email, and text message system. So that we're trying to get to have that phone call. And that was another thing we learned from the March 13th. We could have launched a phone call to that system, but we didn't. And as I explained to the group, I think on the Saturday, that was on us. We did not do that. That was an error on our part that we should have done.
Liberty.
I'm, work with the Pahoa Neighborhood Watch Association, and they have certain that would be a logical way to go for early notification, but you see, I would think, logically shouldn't be groups because, well, we were working very hard to keep crime out of our areas, and I know on Pahoa, we're doing a pretty good job of keeping the crime down. And we've got several members that are now becoming, certified. So there's an open, method of early notification right there by getting these groups involved. I mean, I don't see why we don't do
And
it.
the challenge, of course, is as people move in, move out, change, as the demography changes, how do you maintain that system? How does it get upgraded, particularly when all of a sudden you say there's not much money and there's all the usual problems that come out of government. So
stuff for us to work on. Other questions to Darryl, other things. I'm really trying to, no, so you're gonna have to wait until the end of our meeting later on. Apologies for those who came in late, but this is a study, not a public meeting, but there will be time later, I promise you. So, are there other questions? Other questions or insights, hindsight, anything? You've shared some of that. What you talked about what you're working on the community notification. What's up? I want to come back to the exposure information, which we have struggled mightily with, I tell you. And how do you see going forward some reconciliation? You said there's some new monitoring that would take place. What else?
Well, I think the monitoring would be a big step for us, as well as the modeling, including some of the meteorological analysis, because it always helps us to identify what we're seeing. And maybe later this afternoon, if he doesn't mind, I'm going to share. He shared some great information with me and helped to maybe clear things up what we saw with the SO2, because as we were having our conversation on planning for that type of modeling, things became much clearer given his experience and expertise.
And I had the pleasure of talking to Chris a little earlier this morning just to get a better understanding of his experience as a meteorologist, trying to model the way gases move around and the way winds and topography change things. But we may have time for that a little later. Other questions from the study group?
Well, I guess I'm just, in your research or figuring out how to do your research, you're hoping to find a way to separate plant introducing things to the environment as opposed to natural release from living on a rift.
Yeah,
Is
and
there
I know
are there tracers, is there a way to differentiate?
Yeah, and I did reach out, I know a question was posed to me on that Saturday as far as the accuracy of what's here. And again, I apologize, the comment in this brochure that hydrogen sulfide is a byproduct of volcanic activity was not meant to minimize or downplay the concerns everyone has with PGV's off-gassing or products. It was just a comment as they developed this brochure that was trying to, I guess, accurately depict what are some of the sources of hydrogen sulfide. When I spoke to Dr. Colin Powell at HBO, he did confirm that hydrogen sulfide is a byproduct of volcanic eruptions, but they don't measure that as well. Their main concern is the SO2, so they don't have a means presently with the existing eruptions to give you a number to put things in perspective, because it is such a small part of the emissions in their opinion. So there may be some ambient background H2S in these areas. I'm not trying to minimize, like I said, the concern with the releases. So I think having that monitoring system in place would at least give us what that ambient background levels are like.
Go ahead, Rene.
I'm kind of confused on your comment here about our volcano people and their monitoring of H2S, because they've got the equipment, highly qualified equipment, to go down into parts of William range where they could get background information if they wanted to do it on a regular basis. So
You're talking about the volcano observatory.
yeah, I've been up there, I've seen the equipment. This is my specialty.
Sure.
And I've seen the equipment, and they got some pretty good stuff. So why can't we get a background reading on these H2S stuff?
I guess they're not measuring, according to Jim, they're not doing a routine analysis of H2S.
My question is, why not? Is it money or is it policy?
I can ask
Can
them.
I just say, here's what I've heard from Jeff Sutton in our previous discussions and in the email traffic we've had. And let me check and see if this is how you're hearing it too, study group. So what I've heard from them is that up at the volcano, it's primarily SO2 coming out. So they don't get a lot of H2S up there, it's H2S down here. That's first. Second, what I've heard also is that I saw two studies, one of which showed some ambient background H2S, and another one didn't show. And neither one of those studies looked very conclusive to me. And I'm curious, Tom, you've been reading every study you can. Is that how that's practically?
Well, the straight answer, I think, as I understand it, is when you combine hydrogen sulfide in a large excess of SO2, it scrubs the hydrogen sulfide, making it into water and sulfur. Therefore, the SO2 becomes the dominant thing if hydrogen sulfide is operating in proximity to the sulfur dioxide. So if you're at Holly Mau Mau, that's what's happening. or at an event, you're getting huge amounts of sulfur dioxide. When you're tapping into geothermal because of the different nature of how we're removing the fluid from the ground, the hydrogen sulfide comes up with the brine, has little time to interact with the sulfur dioxide, and therefore becomes a predominant factor in what geothermal emissions are, whereas it is a negligible factor in what volcanic emissions
So,
are.
and in terms of, Jeff's sort of study about, there were some either fumaroles or fissures or cracks down in this area, the South Rib, where in one study they found some coming up by itself. It wasn't from PGU, and then another one they couldn't find any.
Yeah, there are, just like Yellowstone, if you go around, there are little vents and fissures at different places. And Jeff said that the USGS had, in fact, there was a study that they did, and they looked at different points. And the one place that they did find H2S coming out of fissure in the ground was up by the vent that's feeding lava into the ocean. But it was at a fairly remote spot. That doesn't mean there aren't others we don't know about. It's just, that's the one that the study identified.
Okay, that's logical.
I've been aware of this issue since 1981, and I haven't really smelled background H2S, and it's a pretty noticeable gas. I've had other people tell me that they have, and it does happen. But living in Leilani since 1981 to 2005, and now in Pohoiki down the road, if it's happening, it's rare, and it's quite a bit different from my personal experience.
I wanted to ask one more question, and this may be beyond what your portfolio is. I wanted to ask you about the fish die-off, which I've heard about, don't know much about it. It's been brought up a couple times. And is there anything you could tell us about that, or anybody else know about what's going on there? Rene, you have some factual information on what happened?
I got a call from Eileen O'Hara at Senator Ruderman's office, and she had noticed that the fish die-off was several days after the first geothermal event. And so she was wondering if there was a connection, possibly, something in the geothermal liquids that might have, gone down and caused that. And so her office tried to reach the Department of Health to find out if they had done the laboratory sampling or taken water samples down there, so that they could, if there were chemicals in that sample that were found uniquely in geothermal, then there would be a link, and if not, then they would have to look elsewhere, right? And she found out that because there is no DOH field investigator on the Hilo side anymore, the guy had to come from Kona, and of course, he had other things, and he didn't come out till 2 days later. In the meantime, the tide had gone in and out several times and flushed everything. She also checked with Bob Nishimoto at the Division of Aquatic Resources about trying to get laboratory results from any fish that might have been taken and studied to see if they were showing any, autopsy of fish. Okay.
Necropsy.
Yeah. And Bob told her that unless the fish was freshly died and was taken and put on ice right away and rushed off to the lab, nothing would show up. I'm not the epidemiologist here, or the toxicologist here, but that's what he told Eileen. And so it's still a big question as to whether there is a connection or not. But we do now know that there's no help coming from DOH and Hilo because there ain't nobody there.
Sorry, Tom, then Laura, if you don't mind.
I would prefer to Laura.
That's a smart thing to do there, Commander Travis, sorry.
I just wanted to say that since the civil defense response and the monitoring is so poor right now, has there been any talk at all about shutting down PVGV until those
Right, I didn't hear you.
Oh, I said, since the response, the civil defense response and the monitoring are poor, we don't really know what's going on. Has there been any talk about shutting down PGV until those things are rectified?
No, there hasn't been discussions of terminating operations.
Can I ask you a question? I don't mean this on the floor against Mike and his operation, but what would be the threshold under which you would do that? What threshold would have to be reached in where you would say you think it would be dangerous to cease operations? And ceasing operations may be more dangerous than, you know, letting it continue in some other way.
And I think that we probably be collectively, I mean, if we had an event that was continuous and producing sufficient product, we would be evacuating and having the discussions at the same time. But prior to an event, right, it's having discussions with PGV and Department of Health on, you know, I guess, probabilities and.
Which decision would that be?
I think it would ultimately be a collective decision.
Like state and county?
And I'm assuming the planning department also be part of that.
Because some of those readings, I mean, they're low levels, but they have been related to some abnormalities in brain function at that level, at the high level that you got.
You were very smart if you let Laura go first.
Yeah. Monitoring equipment for heavy metals, do you have any?
No, sir.
Is that because you've been advised that there isn't a danger from heavy metal discharge in releases of the sort that we had on the 13th of March?
Correct. We haven't had any, I guess, speaking from my 3 or 4 month experience with this, there hasn't been any guidance from the other regulatory agencies, Department of Health, FDA, that would recommend us monitoring for that, but I can go back and question if that's something we should be monitoring.
I would appreciate it if you did. I can go into a chemistry lesson, as I understand it, on abatement, that it occurs to me that it's possible that we're putting heavy metals into the air when we put those plumes there. I just want everybody to understand this, so I'll ask a question. Are you responsible for monitoring and maintaining the levels of discharge of H2S at PGV, or is that another governmental responsibility?
That would be a Department of Health and EPA would do that. Agency.
So what you need to do is have sufficient monitoring and prediction so that you can do emergency relief.
Correct.
And I went last as a nit, but I went on trying to get the emergency response plan and the emergency multi-agency mitigation plan off the internet so I could understand the role of civil defense. And for some reason, it's it says public document but not available, and we can't get that from the internet. I don't know why.
Nobody said you can make it available.
Well, I would say it should be available to anybody that wants it.
Absolutely. Other question, yeah, Bob.
Just a couple things. One was that I want to thank you because you came to the Akibona to our meeting and you came here, and I know it's not easy. I know it's really not.
I got the water ready if you want it.
No, but I really appreciate it because our experience has been really difficult with that kind of stuff. And like as Department of Health missing in action, as you saw when you were there. And so I hope we can continue that, and I just want to make sure everybody appreciates the hard work. The last thing is just, I think the door-to-door thing is not very practical, so I want you to take that into consideration when you guys are doing this planning, because it just takes too long. I don't know what you're gonna do, but the gas moves with the wind and speed, and so that's a really big area, and so the door-to-door thing is gonna be difficult, so I just hope you remember that.
Yeah. Can I just say, look, we're gonna make time at the later in the meeting, so you're just gonna have to hold up, and if you don't mind stepping back from the table, please.
Okay, Bob, let me know when you're ready for this report.
Yeah, a little later on.
Stuff you're asking me to do.
Because we got 70 people here, so we also want to make comments, so thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, we had a community monitor for Jerome, and I've had it for about 5 or 6 years, and then about 6 months ago, somebody else had requested the monitor, and it hasn't been used in about 2 years simply because we hadn't had the funding to have the monitor recalibrated, and also had to be probably repaired. The pole, the substrate most likely isn't working. And we're talking somewhere around the $2,000 mark, $2,500 mark.
For the calibration.
Calibration, and my feelings are this monitor was here, was being able to be used, we were using it until it became a problem. Then I couldn't get the funding for it, because I had to go through the planning commission and a whole three-ring circus to get the forms to even have that happen. So my point is that we have a monitor, it can be fixed, it can be used. We should have had it available now so we knew what was happening, because if there is a conflict with monitors, like Michael has experienced with myself numerous times earlier, where, I'd be out there with a monitor, and a few minutes later, somebody from his plant would be out there, and there were a couple times we even compared readings. And they were pretty much similar. They weren't exactly, but they were similar. But the point is, without the community having a monitor, we're completely, we can't even work without something to compare to. We have nothing to compare to. That's my point.
Now, it may be premature because we will surely have some ideas and recommendations on monitoring. There'll be strong recommendations because we're confused by exposures and we're puzzled and gotta get to the better answers. But do you have thoughts on community monitoring that you would like to at least raise with this group? I'm not trying to put you on the spot, maybe. What are your thoughts on that?
And again, I apologize to keep talking about the SO2, but I think for me personally, I learned a lot of lessons with that. And that again, we're dealing with a gas that will move throughout the community and similar characteristics and properties. But one of the things we do with the SO2 is we issue gas badge monitors to all of the DOE schools and charter schools in the area so that they could have that situational capability on campus. We did talk about it as part of the after-action review, and I'm waiting to sit down with the Department of Health to discuss if that's going to be practical or feasible. In the meantime, with the Jerome that was already in the community, I'd like to maybe connect more later and find out who's it belong to and how can we get it calibrated, because
I've got your collected memoirs of data, which I want to get back to. Yeah, Marie.
Okay, now you're talking about my children. Just because they've got a meter, when they see it once every 6 months, it doesn't stop there. They need to have a tank of calibrating gas. If they don't have time to check it before they go out, they can check it afterwards.
Right.
They need to know each time they use that unit what its accuracy is. Otherwise, the plus or minus error factor on the data is quite large. So if you're going to do this, somebody needs to be trained in how to use this instrument.
And that's where I think we're bringing that experience with the SO2. We trained the schools, we partnered with GasPro. GasPro did all the calibration, recalibration. They also did all the data logging, so all of the exceedances were recorded and captured. So I don't have the plan to hand to you right now and say this is a monitoring plan, but that's definitely what we want to work
But
towards.
you said gas badges.
I wanted to ask you about that.
You let me make a comment on that.
Sure.
I worked at the occupational health lab for almost 33 years. It is the analytical laboratory for Oregon OSHA. We know that gas badges have a larger plus or minus error factor than, say, a monitor with passive monitoring or a monitor with a pump. So when you talk about using badges, you need to keep in mind that that has a larger plus or minus error factor. Yeah, so you gotta be careful what you use, how you calibrate it, its error factor, when you decide to use these things in the community. And badges are okay for a quick answer, but for a more accurate idea of what's going on, they're not.
And that's where, if I could step back, you heard me earlier say that to develop that monitoring plan, we need the subject matter experts, so we buy the right equipment and put them in the right places, inclusive of a full model.
Absolutely.
So when I threw out the gas badge, that was one system that we developed with a particular goal and objective in mind to help the campuses, but it may not be the application here. So when I said that, we're looking at a monitoring plan. We haven't even purchased equipment, or we're not prepared to purchase right now until we identify what is the right product.
Right, but the monitoring and how you take care of the equipment, how you calibrate it, is the first line of being the most important, because all of the decisions, all of the assumptions come from, if they come from these meters, or there can be very erroneous.
The badges.
Yeah, or any monitor,
Yeah,
any
yeah.
monitor's not calibrated.
Badges too.
Yeah.
You have to be careful what you use.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, on the badges, obviously they're less accurate. But if a badge would be an alert system,
Right.
that's what you're looking for. You're not looking for, who cares what the number is? Is this going to hurt me now? If you're looking for that, maybe badges have their place. If you're not really interested in 2 or 3, but interested, hey, this is the level I need to be concerned about, as just a plus minus, just a yes, this is a problem.
As a rough.
Rough.
But the
Gives you a
plus
rough,
or minus
rough
can be
tell.
large, because
How large? I mean,
it can be reading lower when it's really higher. This is the,
I don't know the answer, so what I'm saying is if the badge could be an alert system, you don't think it can be?
So, maybe there's multiple levels of efficacy and precision. So you start with that tells you, it's sort of like the lights on your car. It doesn't tell you everything that's going on, but the red light comes on and tells you something's going on. So the badges could be that, and then there could be a second line, a third line that gets more precision, more accurate. I think this is stuff for us to wrestle with in what we would recommend, and we will send those recommendations on. We're gonna do that. That's part of what we just got to do. Last questions for Darryl before we let him go. He's got some other things to do. Yep.
Jim, what's the calibration protocol for hazmat? I promise I can get that for you. They do calibrate according to the manufacturer's requirements for all of their detectors, so they have all the gas on site. So they are calibrating as they're supposed to, but I don't know the specifics of those markers.
And Joe, whatever information you're gonna provide us, if it comes electronically, it will go to the whole group. It can either go through our point of contact, Jeff Melrose, or it can come directly to me, or it can go to the whole group. We're fine. This is not, like the Supreme Court or something. Good, no problem. Any last ones? Thank you.
Well, I guess if I could just say, again, thank you for those that I've worked with, like Rene, when I was at fire. I think she knows that I keep my word, I work on it. So if you don't know me, I'm asking for your trust and confidence.
So we write him down as a good guy and a good guy column. We got a bad guy, good guy.
Well, I think, like I said, we need your help to make the system better. Right. So, thank you.
Okay, good, thanks. I'm going to take just a couple of minutes break, and then what I'd like to do is dive into the work at hand unless we have other things. Hang on, Bob, if you would.
Two quick points. One is there anyone from the Department of Health here that has a question?
I don't believe there is.
And the second is, I think as a group, we need to discuss what assumptions that we've made, have a consensus with, that need to be changed as a result of what we
Good. We'll take that up, and then we'll start to see if we can't put those into our plan. See you in a few minutes.
Do you have a studies that show that there's notable decrease in rate
So I was going to mention, you're sure, again, I'm really getting confused with people throwing around parts per million.
Well, I accidentally wrote parts. I started writing parts per million, and I realized that was 3,000 parts.
1 to 5 parts per million is their level of detection, right? If this is right, is
5,000 ppb.
no, 0.1 parts per million.
But I'm saying if you have 1 to 5 parts
Okay, per million,
it would be 1,000, 5,000 parts per million. So they got 3,000, and that shows there is a difference between
I haven't read this. I love to read it. I didn't see it. All I saw was the few. Yeah, please send. Is it none of these, right? I did see some of these. Okay.